Greetings, St. Barnabas members and friends. It's a joy to be with you again and for our daily meditation reflecting on the Lord's Prayer. And I want to say one more thing about forgiveness. So I know we've been focusing on that for several of the meditations, and I just want to say one more thing. So very briefly, reviewing, I've commented how the Lord's Prayer is located at the center of the Sermon on the Mount, and then Jesus kind of unpacks this whole notion of forgiveness in several places in the Sermon on the Mount. He invites us to be, he uses the word perfect. He invites us to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect, letting our benevolence fall upon all, just like the sun rises on the righteous and the unrighteous, and the rain falls on the just and the wicked. And we're invited to measure not lest we be measured, and to judge not lest we be judged. And we're urged, if we are bringing our gift before the altar and remember our sister or brother has something against us, to go to them and be reconciled. And then I understand this particular wisdom saying to perhaps be about our own conscience. If we have our adversary arising within us, our adversary I understand to be our conscience, make peace quickly, lest our conscience throw us into jail and we not get out till we pay the last penny. And in other reflections, I've commented that to not forgive is to place oneself in prison. So there's much in the Sermon on the Mount about this theme, but then 2 chapters later, Jesus invites a tax collector, Matthew, to follow him and be one of his disciples. And Matthew immediately gets up from the table where he's collecting taxes and follows Jesus. And then that night there's a party at Matthew's house. And this sounds like a great time. There's a party with sinners and tax collectors and all kinds of people. And Matthew's gospel doesn't tell us that the Gentiles are there, but there's every reason to think they are. And there's other times in Matthew's gospel when the Gentiles are present. And so there they are with the tax collectors and the sinners and the people that are the foreigners, the people of other races. And there's Jesus in the midst of them at a party. And the highly religious people begin to get upset about this, and they ask Jesus' disciples. Interestingly, they don't go to Jesus, and that's often the case. They go to his disciples and say, "Why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and the sinners?" And Jesus says, "Go learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Now, I understand the word sacrifice to be symbolic of the whole religious system of the time. Jesus says, "I desire mercy, not religion." Then he goes on he says, "Go learn what this means." Then he goes on to say, it's not the well who need a physician, it's those who are sick. And it's not, I didn't come for the righteous, I came for the sinners. And both of those are wisdom sayings, inviting people. How do you see yourself? Do you see the other as the sinner and you're the righteous? Do you see the other as sick and you are well? Just profound moment for all of us to pause. Measure not lest you be measured. Judge not lest you be judged. How do you see yourself in the midst of the drama of being human? There's Jesus amongst the wounded, the ill, the hurting, the excluded, the tax collectors, the foreigners, the rich, the poor, the franchised, the disenfranchised, just the gamut of being human. And he's there mercifully. He's there as a forgiving presence, not a measuring, judging presence. Again, in the midst of the drama, the trauma, the incompleteness of the human situation. Humanity seems to be on its way somewhere in God's design or plan, and we're not there yet. Frankly, we're at a time when perhaps it's the most difficult it's ever been to be a human being. And I mean that, speaking of that in terms of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Human beings, mammals who still have an instinctive, reactive nature, and yet are able to be fully self-reflective, wanting to be good, and yet being fear-driven, reactive mammals. St. Paul says it so well. The good I want to do, I don't do. The bad I don't want to do, I do. Who will save me from this trauma of being human? 3 chapters later in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus and his disciples are walking through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and the disciples get hungry and they begin to pick the grain and grind it in their hands and then eat it. And again, the religious leaders say they're doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath. And Jesus has it's a wonderful response. I don't want to go into the details. His conclusion is, because you failed to learn what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Because you failed to learn what it means, you have condemned the innocent. Now, all of us, take a breath. What does it mean to learn to be merciful? Go learn what this means. I desire mercy. Because you failed to learn what this means, I desire mercy. You have condemned the innocent. Now, I hope this lands for you. I want to make this a little more personal, and I hope it lands for you. What does it mean to be merciful in your household? What does it mean to be fully embracing of the human experience with your spouse, who is probably different from you, and at least in some regards has different perspectives and perhaps different values in some ways, different preferences, different ways of doing things? What's it like to be in the kitchen with your spouse when you're preparing a meal or cleaning up? Or what's that like? What's it like to be merciful and embracing of your children, especially your adult children, or of your parents, or of your coworkers? What's it like to look out at the human situation with a merciful, forgiving perspective, not a measuring, judging perspective? So here we are in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, and this meditation is for May the 18th. And what's it like to be out and about, and you're a person who thinks everybody should be wearing a mask all the time, and you see people not wearing a mask? What's it like to be a merciful, understanding presence to that situation? What's it like if you're one who thinks, we don't need to wear masks all the time, this is overkill, and you see all these people wearing masks? And what's it like for you to be merciful, to be forgiving, to be understanding, to be inclusive of the full gamut of being human? Abba of us. Who are the us? Abba of us. Forgive us as we forgive those who are also incomplete. And let me just add a slight caveat that tees up the next reflection. Previously I said the nourishment of the supernatural bread, the nourishment of the Spirit, can be thought of in at least 3 dimensions. The fruits of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit, and there's one I didn't name, and that is wisdom. You see, as we begin to intend to be merciful and forgiving, or as we live a life of wanting to be merciful and forgiving, it will drive us back to our God, back to our prayer. And those first three petitions: let your name be hallowed in me. You hallow your name in me. Let the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of mercy, emerge in me. Let your kingdom come in me. Let your will happen through me. The intention to forgive and be merciful will drive us there, and it will teach us wisdom. And that wisdom will teach us to enjoy the full gamut of the human experience, to look out upon it, the challenge of being human, with mercy and forgiveness and joy. To have joy for how different we are and our incompleteness, to see our incompleteness as being perfectly imperfect. And when Jesus said, it's the sick who need a physician, what did he really mean? When he said, I came for the sinners, what did he really mean? There he is at a party in Matthew's house with the sinners and the tax collectors and the foreigners. None of them were excluded by Jesus. Apparently, none of them were off-putting for Jesus. He was there at the party, and I bet you he was having a good time. More to come.